Good morning, everyone. My name is Rabbi Moshe Orlovsky. We're here at Yeshiva Etzion, and today I am going to present the first session of what will hopefully be a series of lectures on Jewish history, where we will hope to cover the period of from the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash until the era of the conclusion of the Gemara. The purpose of these discussions are not necessarily to get into the political or economical situations of these times, but it's more to get a developmental understanding of the transferring of the Masorah, of the tradition, and passing down from rabbi to student, to get a better understanding of the roles that different rabbis played, their personalities, their traits, what they accomplished in their own rights, in their own times. And to understand which parts, whether it was in Eretz Yisrael or later on in Bavel, became the major centers of Torah learning and what was accomplished and where. There will be times where we will bring in some political and social factors where they do apply, and to demonstrate the strength and power that the rabbis had to overcome the difficulties and challenges that were given to them. So today, being the first lecture, I have called this lecture from destruction to rebuilding, and we're going to cover today from the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash until the Anshe Knesset HaGedola. So the year was 3338 in the Jewish calendar, or the year 423 BCE. The Jews have now been ignoring Jeremiah the prophet, for 17 years. For 17 years, he has now been giving warning to Klal Yisrael, to Am Yisrael, saying that we're doomed for destruction, the Beis HaMikdash is going to be destroyed, we're going into exile, that it's time, we have to do tshuva, we have to repent. And he was constantly laughed at, he was mocked, he was put in jail. The letters and scrolls that he written to the people were publicly ripped up, and he wasn't taken seriously. The Jews felt comfortable, they were safe, they felt safe within their walls. They survived the previous attack by Sancheiriv, who was the king of Assyria, when about 130 years earlier he came and exiled the 10 other tribes, which we call the lost tribes of Israel. They were not able to conquer Jerusalem. Therefore, they felt safe within their own walls, and they felt as long as they had the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, and they were able to keep the sacrifices going, and were able to keep their connection to God, that they would be safe. But unfortunately, it was not the case. Nebuchadnezzar, who is now the king of Babylon, king of the Babylonians, he conquered the Assyrians and was bent out on world domination. So after he conquered the Assyrians, he went out to conquer Israel, as both to show, I'm going to be able to conquer what Assyria couldn't. And again, knowing that Israel was a powerhouse, being fortified in their great city of Jerusalem. And again, Israel, to remember, was always a social and economic strong point, being on the coastline of the Mediterranean, it was always a very strong strategic place, being on the Mediterranean, because you controlled the ports going out to anywhere into Europe. It was a great shortcut traveling if you were going, say, through to Turkey, to Greece, or going down to Egypt, which was another major powerhouse that Nebuchadnezzar went after in the future. And in the year 423 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar came to Jerusalem, and on the 9th of Tammuz, he broke into the walls of Jerusalem, and the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed on Tisha B'Av. And just about everyone but a handful of people were either killed or chained and led into exile into Babylonia. Very few would return. The only hope that they had was a prophecy given to them by Jeremiah, that in 70 years they would return. But to many people who were in their 20s, 30s, 40s, there was not much hope to them. Because once you're at that age, 70 years from now, what's that going to do for you? There were a few people who were able to escape to Egypt. There were a few people who were allowed to stay in Eretz Yisrael. One of them was Yirmiyahu himself, who Nebuchadnezzar actually had a liking for, so allowed him to stay. But Yirmiyahu himself was not able to bear being in Eretz Yisrael while his brethren were being taken away to Bavel. So it said that he chased down. So Yirmiyahu actually chased down the path that his brother, that Am Yisrael was taken away. He said he found the traces of blood and followed them until he found the footsteps of children, and he knew he was on the right path. And then once he found them, he said he took the shackles that were on their hands and put one around his neck. And he said that, I'm not letting them go into exile without me. Once they reached the Euphrates River, Hashem said to him, he said, if you go with them, I'm not going with them. If you stay here, I'll go with them. It was not Hashem's will for Yirmiyahu to go with them into exile. Not at that point anyways. So Yirmiyahu had no choice but to turn around and go back to Eretz Yisrael, where he would actually end up later on going to Egypt. But Hashem did go with the exiles into Bavel, where they did have their own prophet in Chizkiyahu. So they did in Yechezkel. So they did have their own prophet among them at that time. Now it's very interesting that in Avadia, in Perek Aleph, Pasuk Chaf, there is a reference that the Jews, even from the first exile, some of them found their way to even France and Spain. So we have tradition that from all the way back from the first temple time, that there are Jews who made their way all the way to France and Spain. And later on, while they were starting to, as we'll talk a little later on, when they started to come back to Eretz Yisrael, they were actually started to move to different areas where Jews started to spread out to places such as Italy, Germany, Morocco, Carrion, which is in modern-day Tunisia. So as early as the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, building of the second Beis Hamikdash, you already had Jews starting to spread out across the world, which made these areas established old communities, which in turn later on, hundreds of years later, when we had, almost 1,000 years later, when you had the end of the Gaonic period, when Jews started to really spread out throughout the world, you had these countries which had large established communities of hundreds and thousands of Jews, which really helped the Jewish population grow and thrive throughout the world. So now the Jews were in Bavel, and despite their decline in Torah knowledge, being in Bavel, they were not as free as they were. They weren't able to learn Torah like they were able to. But the one thing they were able to do was they were able to still live in communities together. I don't have a map, but let's pretend in Bavel, which is modern-day Iraq, you have the Euphrates River and the Tigris River. So on this side of the Euphrates is right over here is the ancient city of Babylon. And spread out throughout cities over here, you had major Jewish populations, which later on, in a couple of hundred years, turned out to become places where great Jewish yeshiva academies grew. So there is an advantage to the Jewish people, to Jews having these communities, because they were able to have the communities together in growth and in numbers, which enabled them to have their strength in numbers and help them keep their Jewish identity. But at the same time, they were in the proximity of Bavel, which never gave Nebuchadnezzar the threat of that they were going to rebel. So Nebuchadnezzar never had to worry about them. At the same time, they were able to grow and thrive in these Jewish communities. At the same time, since they had these communities along the Euphrates River, they actually had very good land to thrive and work with, a lot of natural resources to work with. And their communities gave them, initially they had to first build up, but 20 years into their exile, their communities became very flourishing. Economically, they grew strongly, and they were very prosperous. This actually led to, as we'll see many years later, when it became time to come back to Eretz Yisrael, the majority of the Jews actually did not come back to Eretz Yisrael. They were very happy and satisfied living in Bavel. They were happy where they were. They were comfortable. They had a good living. They had a nice lifestyle. They didn't want to come back. So those communities in a couple hundred years later were going to be the communities that the great Talmudic academies were going to be built around. So now the reign of Bavel reigned from Nebuchadnezzar to his son Avel Merodach, and then to Belshazzar. Belshazzar, we have the famous story where he miscalculated the 70 years. He miscalculated the 70 years of Yirmiyahu's prophecy and decided to throw big feast, big banquet, took out all of the kalim, all of the vessels of the Beis Hamikdash, threw a nice big party. Then all of a sudden, start seeing writing on the wall. very superstitious, writing on the wall. Didn't know what was going on. And nobody was able to read it. It was actually written in Ksav Ivri at the time, which the layman was not able to read. So they had to brought Daniel to come in and to explain what was going on. So Daniel came in and he read it, and it was actually in a puzzle where it wasn't read across, but it was read up and down. And it said, Mineh tekel ufarsin. It said, you've been counted, your time, meaning your time is up. Tekel, you've been weighed, meaning that you're a wanted man. Ufarsin, and your kingship is now going to be split from you. And on that very same night, Belshazzar was assassinated. And who came in? Darius the first, the king of Media, who had an alliance with Koresh, the king of the Persians. They came in and took over the Babylonian kingdom. So Darius was the first king who took over after Belshazzar. Now Darius only ruled for 1 year. He died after 1 year, and Koresh, who is actually his son-in-law, took over the next year, and it officially now became the Persian kingdom. So even though the area was still sometimes referred to as Bavel, it was really, this is the kingdom of Paras. This was the Persian kingdom. Koresh decided to give the Jews permission to go back and build the second Beis Hamikdash. Koresh himself had no problem with each nation believing and worshiping in their own God, as long as he knew that they were going to be loyal to his kingdom. So he let the Jews go back to Yerushalayim and to start building the second Beis Hamikdash. So this was in the year 3391 or 370 BCE. So now the Jews had permission to go back to build the Beis Hamikdash, and this was spearheaded by Zerubbabel, who was a descendant of King David. He was a descendant of King David, and was appointed the leader of the Jews at the time. With Yehoshua ben Yehotzadak, who was appointed by Zechariah as the Kohen Gadol. Nehemiah, Mordechai, Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi. These were the leaders of the group. These were the leaders who spearheaded this group to go back and build the second Beis Hamikdash. But in Sefer Ezra, it says that only 42,360 people went back to Eretz Yisrael, accompanied by 7,337 slaves. 42,000 people out of the millions that were exiled. Only 42,000 people decided to go back to Eretz Yisrael. That's how comfortable the exiles were got in Babel. That when they had the opportunity to go back, they didn't jump on it. Which in itself is it's a shame. It's a shame. You have an opportunity to go back to Eretz Yisrael, to go build the Beit HaMikdash. You jump up, you go take the opportunity. You don't say, I'm comfortable here. What's going to happen? Mashiach is going to come tomorrow. You go, I don't want to leave here. I have it nice over here. I got my luxury condo. I got my swimming pool. How am I supposed to get my BMW over to Eretz Yisrael? You know what gas prices are over there? I don't want to go. Yeah. But yeah, if you have the opportunity to go, build the Beit HaMikdash, you jump on it and go. You take the opportunity. So a lot of the people, they gave money to help the cause, but they didn't jump up and they didn't jump up and they didn't jump up and join in with the cause. So Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi since they were prophets, they were able to discern where the exact spot the Mizbeach was supposed to be. They were able to build the Mizbeach, and they were able to start bringing korbanot. But they started to run into some problems. The Kutim, the Kuthites who were there, they were enjoying having Eretz Yisrael without the Jews. They had the land, they had the rights to Eretz Yisrael, they had the power. The last thing they wanted was the Jews to come back and take the land over again. So they wanted to stop the Jews from coming back and rebuilding the Beit HaMikdash. So the first thing that they did... The Samaritans? The Kutim, yeah, they lived in Samaria. So the Samaritans...
The Good Samaritan is the dead Samaritan.
So the Samaritans their first approach was they came over to the Jews and they said, you know what, let us help. Let us help build the Beit HaMikdash with you. We're on the same side, we kind of believe in the same God. We're kind of on the same team, let us help. Really they were trying to ambush the plot. They were trying to ruin it from the inside. So Zerubbabel had a strong response to them, and his exact words was, "It is not for you together with us to build a temple for our God. Rather, we by ourselves will build it for Hashem, God of Israel, as King Cyrus, king of Persia, has commanded us." He told them, thanks but no thanks. He said, we have nothing to do with you. This isn't your God. This is our God. Leave us alone. We'll take care of this. So after their failed attempt, they weren't going to sit down quietly and just sit back and take a no. So they spent years of writing propaganda letters to King Koresh, to King Cyrus, saying, if you let the Jews build up the Beit HaMikdash, they're going to end up recreating their national identity, and they're going to end up coming to rebel against you and revolt against you, and you're going to lose control over them and lose their power, and you're going to lose the control over Eretz Yisrael. And they went on with this for years. So Koresh himself never actually succumbed to the propaganda, but it actually worked when Koresh died and Achashverosh took over as the king of Paras, when Achashverosh became the Persian king. Because Achashverosh himself, as we know, was a very big Jew hater himself. And he really didn't need too much instigation to stop the Jews from their project. So as soon as Achashverosh took over, he started reading these propaganda letters. He said, "That's it, enough." And he stopped the project. He said, the Jews are no longer allowed to build the Beit HaMikdash. So Zerubbabel and Yehoshua ben Yotzadak, Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi, they stayed in Eretz Yisrael. They stayed with the Jewish community there. Nehemiah and Mordechai, they both returned to the Persian kingdom. Both of them had their roles to play, as we will see in a little bit. 8 years later, after Achashverosh took over, the Purim story took place. We all know the Purim story. We don't need to go into too much detail about that. Haman tried to get permission to kill the Jews, and again, this is part of Mordechai's purpose of returning back to the Persian kingdom. Through him and Esther, we were able to be saved and not wiped out through Haman's plans. And in addition to that, Mordechai now had a strong role in influencing the Persian kingdom. He became Achashverosh's top advisor. So he had a very strong influence in the Persian kingdom. In addition to that, Achashverosh and Esther had a son, Darius II. With Mordechai being there, he was able to, even though Darius II was being grown up and being raised to be the king of Persia, and obviously Persian education and all the idolatry and everything that came along with it, at least Mordechai was there to give him some form of a Jewish identity, some form of a Jewish pride, some form of an understanding of what he represents, of what he was able to, of what he meant to the Jewish people.
I see you tonight. Go get up.
So once Achashverosh passed away, and their son Darius II took over, this was in the year 3408 or 353 BCE. I hope over the weekend and as time goes on with our lectures, I plan on typing out timelines for all of you with dates of what was going on and what was happening when, so it'll be easier to be following along. I was asked to give this share yesterday, so this is what I could do overnight. So once Darius was able to take over, became king, he immediately gave permission to rebuild the second Beis Hamikdash. This was exactly 70 years after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. This was the fulfillment of Yirmiyahu's prophecy. And all propaganda that was given to him by the the Samaritans, he completely disregarded. He just disregarded, didn't pay any heed to them. So now you have in Yerushalayim, you already had Zechariah there. You had Haggai and Malachi. You had Zerubbabel, who was the Jewish leader. You had Yoshua ben Yehotzadak, who was the Kohen Gadol. And interestingly enough, Haggai, through Nevuah, actually ordered the Jews in Yerushalayim to start building the second Beis Hamikdash before the order came from Persia. So even though before the order came, they started the building. And finally, in the year 3412 or 349 BCE, the second Beis Hamikdash was rebuilt. So the second Beis Hamikdash was rebuilt. Now, obviously, it wasn't in such a glorious state. It was just it was like a put-together, makeshift Beis Hamikdash. It definitely wasn't as glorious as the first one. It said any elder who remembered the first Beis Hamikdash was crying when they saw the second Beis Hamikdash, just because they just remembered the splendor and the glory and the beauty of what the Beis Hamikdash used to be, and now they had basically just a makeshift Beis Hamikdash, but it was still a temple nonetheless. So without a doubt, this was it was definitely still a momentous occasion in the Jewish history. We had a second Beis Hamikdash. And on top of that, they had the authority to govern over themselves. Zerubbabel was the leader at the time. But despite this, the spiritual situation in Yerushalayim was in complete disaster. It was in complete devastation. Now, this was about to change with the arrival of one of the most influential persons in all of Jewish history. As we will see, hopefully, throughout the continued series of lectures, there are many times that it seems like our Jewish history and the continuing of Torah and everything that we have seems to, at certain points, all come together and flow through one person who just saves it. That it all just comes to a mess, and like an hourglass, just all comes through one person, and he saves it. And through him, Torah is revived and able to rebuild. In this case, our hero over here was Ezra HaSofer. Ezra did not come initially to the building of the Beis Hamikdash. He came a year after the Beis Hamikdash was rebuilt. The reason why was because his Rebbe, Baruch ben Neriah, was too old and too feeble to make the trip. And he did not want to leave his Rebbe. Baruch ben Neriah himself was the Talmud of Yirmiyahu. So Ezra did not want to leave his Rebbe to go to Eretz Yisrael. But the year after the Beit HaMikdash was built, Baruch ben Neriah was nifter, and Ezra HaSofer came to Eretz Yisrael. And when he came to Yerushalayim, he was just he was just like mortified by what he saw. Marketplaces were open on Shabbat. There was a great amount of intermarriage going on. A good amount of people didn't even have Brit Milah. And he knew that things had to change. He took it upon himself to know that things had to change. I mean, he was the recognized gadol of the door. He was the Talmud of Yirmiyahu. So he was the Talmud of the gadol of the door. His last year, when he couldn't come to Eretz Yisrael, he spent that year fortifying all the communities in Bavel, knowing that he was going to leave soon, to make sure that everything in Bavel was ready for his leaving. So now when he came to Eretz Yisrael, when he came to Israel and saw the devastation in Yerushalayim, he knew he had to take care of it. So what he did was, first he gathered together all the Talmidei Chachamim that were around, and all of the Nevi'im that were around. He gathered them together, and he formed together a committee called the Anshe Knesset HaGedola, what we call the Men of the Great Assembly. And we're going to end off with them in a few minutes, and we'll see the huge role and the monumentous role that they played in setting up the structured life for Jews to follow ever since. Ezra himself called for a public gathering near the Beis Hamikdash. He made a decree. He was given by Daryavesh to act as governor, as a judge, and as judge and enforcer in Yerushalayim. He wasn't allowed to be a military or police, but he was able to be the judge and able to set laws. So what he did was he made a public gathering, saying everybody must show up on this day. It was on the first. So he was everyone had to show up on this day, and if you didn't show up, all your property was confiscated. Every single Jew living in Yerushalayim must show up to this gathering at the Beis HaMikdash, or your property was confiscated. On that day, when everybody showed up, Ezra sat fasting and weeping and led a 3-day lecture on how we need to do tshuva, on how we need to live back into Torah life, on how we now have the opportunity that we have the Beit HaMikdash again, and on how we can't live life the way it is. He set up a Beit Din, he set up courts starting on the 1st of Tevet, and every single married couple in Yerushalayim had to go to this Beit Din, and their marriage had to be investigated. And anyone that was intermarried on the spot had to get divorced. Any marriage that was not done according to halacha had to get divorced on the spot. This way, over a period of a couple of months, all improper marriages were cleaned up. In addition to that, Ezra HaSofer brought for a korban the second para aduma. This was only the second one brought since Moshe Rabbeinu's para aduma. Moshe brought the first one. Ezra brought the second one. Ezra brought the para aduma, made the purification waters, and purified everybody in Yerushalayim. This way they were able to go to the Beit HaMikdash tahor and not tameh. In addition to that, he changed the script that the Torah was written in. The Torah was written in a script called Ksav Ivri. It was a special script that was used by the higher educational class, which most people were not able to read, and people just didn't have access to the Torah. And he changed it to the script that we have now in our Torah, which we call Ktav Ashiri. This way, he made the Torah publicly accessible. He also made the decree that every Monday, Thursday, and Shabbat, you have to have Torah reading. This is based upon the fact that in the Torah it says that they traveled in the desert for 3 days and couldn't find water. And then they complained, showing that you can't live 3 days without water. And just like Torah is water, so you can't live 3 days without Torah. So after Ezra started cleaning up Yerushalayim and changing the nature and the spiritual mode of Yerushalayim, you can say the Calvary came, because next came Nehemiah. Nehemiah was a close friend and advisor to Darius II. Nehemiah tried for years to get permission to go to Yerushalayim. but being such a close friend and such a close advisor, he was never granted permission. But finally, after seeing the heartbreak that he was suffering from not being able to go, Darius gave him permission to go on condition that he'll return after his job is over. So Darius went, and he was given permission, and he was sent with weapons and an army, and he was given military control. He got to Yerushalayim, and the first thing that he did is he came at night. He came quietly, not as to make a big entrance. And his first ordeal, the first thing that he wanted to take care of was to rebuild the walls of Yerushalayim. Because all this time, the walls of Yerushalayim were never rebuilt, which left them open to constant attacks by the Samaritans and other nations that were able just to come in and raid Yerushalayim and raid the temple and raid its residents. So they built up the walls of Yerushalayim, and this way Yerushalayim was finally protected. Once they were protected, Nehemiah was a big part in helping institute the sanctity of Shabbat by being the main step in creating the laws of Muktzah. Nehemiah originally started instituting that in the beginning, everything was Muktzah. All Kalim, everything. They went to the complete extreme. To the point that literally everything was Muktzah except for a knife to cut a fig cake. Otherwise, everything else was Muktzah. And then slowly, they started allowing more things until they reached the stability where the Jews were able to keep Shabbos with the spirit of Shabbos. So now with Nehemiah still in Yerushalayim, and with Ezra, so Ezra was there, and Nehemiah was there. Anshe Knesset Hagadolah was able to get together. The Anshe Knesset Hagadolah, they spread for a span of about 50 years. Not every person in Anshe Knesset Hagadolah necessarily lived in the same place or at the same time, but the group together enhanced. They worked together with a specific purpose. Their purpose was they were the next step in our Masorah. The Anshe Knesset Hagadolah their purpose was to be the next step in the tradition. The first Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says, Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai. Moshe received the Torah from Har Sinai. U'Mesur Yehoshua, and he gave it to Yehoshua. U'Yehoshua l'Zekanim, and Yehoshua gave it to the Zekanim, who were the Shoftim. U'Zekanim l'Neviim, and the Zekanim gave it to the Neviim, like Shmuel and David and Natan and Gad and Yechezkel and Yoshua and Yirmiyahu, and all the way to the last of the Neviim, like Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. And the Nevi'im gave it to the Anshe Knesset Hagadolah. So they were the last ones to receive this transmission before start to move on. The main challenge of the Anshe Knesset Hagadolah, the Anshe Knesset Hagadolah was to prepare Am Yisrael for a new method of transmitting Torah. No longer did they have the local Navi, the local prophet to go to when they had a question. Usually when you had a question, you went to the prophet. Remember, we have only 48 prophets that were known, but there were really hundreds and hundreds of prophets that were around. So you were able to go to a prophet anytime you want, and you were able to ask a question, and they were able to have a direct connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and give you an answer. But the Anshe Knesset HaGedola was the very beginning of what we would call now Rabbinic Judaism, where we have to rely on our Chachamim, on our rabbis, and the teachings of their rabbis, and what is passed down from generation to generation. So what they had to leave for us as the leading Sanhedrin at the time was they had to leave for us a guidebook on how to live as a functioning Jew for every day. So what they did is, it was Anshe HaKnesset HaGedola who instituted for us our tefillos, our brachos, and their structures. They formed what our davening is. They formed what Shmona Esrei is, what the 18 brachas are, what the order is, when do we say them, what the brachas of Kriyat Shema is, what's the order of Psukei de Zimra, what's the wording of Kiddush, what's the wording of Havdalah. You have to say Kiddush not only in davening, but on a cup of wine, but on the wine also. They put the Samaritans into Cherem. So to wrap up this session, we see that the Anshe Knesset HaGedola at this point, they reunited us with Hashem. They gave us a framework to live by, and despite the loss of prophecy at the time, the Mesorah still lives on because of them. And this is why the Mishnah ends, that same Mishnah ends off with them saying three things: be cautious in judgment, raise many students, and make a protective fence for the Torah.